Hello guys, welcome to Solving Solutions. So on today's tutorial, we are going to show you how to understand scale and paper size. So we have a note, and then the note says a scale defines how much real world area appears per unit length on your paper. Right, good. So your scale choice is constrained by your paper size. It's very important. Therefore, scale cannot be chosen arbitrarily. So if the intended sheet cannot physically contain the map at your scale, you must either change the scale or change the paper size. So the scale is never chosen in isolation. We have said it. It is decided based on the paper size and the extent of the map. Right, good. So the scale you use depends on the paper size, because the scale determines how much real world area can fit into a sheet of fixed physical dimension. Now you need to understand that the paper size you are going to use, A4, A3, A2, A0, whatever paper size you are going to use, you already have fixed physical dimensions. Therefore, when you want to model the real world into that paper, you need to model it using a scale. However, you need to also understand the paper size you are going to use. So we are going to demonstrate that using this let's call it a survey plan. Now in this survey plan, we are using AutoCAD 2007. Yeah, so in this survey plan, we are going to use the print layout, which is the plot layout that's for us to print. Now the name, let's use previous plot, and then for the printer and the plotter, we are converting it to PDF. So for the purpose of this demonstration, we are going to Microsoft Print to PDF. Now paper size, which is the crux of today's tutorial. If we use A4, let's start by using A4, and then we come to the plot area. That's the area we want to plot. Let's window it. So let's say we are starting from this extent down to this extent, right? So now let's preview. Now from the extent, we can see that for an A4 paper size, this is how our plot will appear, right? So now click on escape. When you come to the plot scale, you are going to see something. We have fit to paper. When you click on fit to paper and then you preview, you are going to see that the extent of your plot has been fitted to the paper size, right? Now let's escape again. If you now decide to say, okay, according to fit to paper, you can see the scale, right? Now from the scale, you can see 1:0.376. Now what is 0.376 means? 376 meters. Now remember that we have a unit, millimeter, and you know when you are converting, units are convertible, right? So when you have 1 millimeter, that's about 1 divided by 1000 meters, or maybe 1 times 10 raised to power minus 3 meters, right? Good. Where we have the prefix of unit conversions. If you remember, when you say centimeter is 10 raised to power minus 2, when you say kilometer is 10 raised to power 3. Right, good. So those are some basic prefixes that we use in conversion. So when you say 1:0.376, what this simply means is that when you fit this our plot to this A4 paper size, the scale being used is that 0.376, right? Now, you know, sometimes in every profession, especially in surveying, we have standard surveying scales, right? Good. So we don't usually use 300, because if we want to round this up to the nearest number, we can say maybe 400. That's 0.3. 0.3 is actually 300. 0.4 is actually 400. 0.5 is 500, as the case may be. So when it gets to 1, then we are looking at 1000. When it gets to 1.5, well, we mean the value we are trying to mention are the values that are under units here. So when the 0.3 changes to 0.5, that means the scale you are using is actually the scale of 1:500. When it gets to 1, the scale you are using is 1:1000. When it gets to this value here, when it gets to 1.5, the scale you're using is 1:1500, right? So what we are trying to say is that professionally, there are different scales that are being used, standard scales that are being used. So if you don't want to use the value of the scale that is here, you can actually uncheck this and then impute a scale you need. So 500 is actually a survey scale, so we can say 0.5, right? So when we say 0.5 and then we try to preview, we are now going to see that it does not really cover the extent of our A4 paper, but it is better, because when you print it and someone uses a scale rule, the person can actually define the extent here, the length here to be 12.25, the length here to be 31.50, the length here to be 12.25, and then the length here to be 32.22. So the essence of today's tutorial is to help you understand the implication of your scale on your paper size. right? So you cannot choose any of them in isolation. You need to understand that the paper size that you choose is actually dependent on your scale, and then the scale that you choose is also dependent on your paper size. So now let's look at something. We are using 0.5 as a scale for A4. Let's now go back to another paper size. Let's say we want to use A3, and you know that A3 is actually bigger than A4, right? So now let's actually window the extent we want to work on. It's actually not necessary, but let's see how that goes. And then let's preview that. You now see that it is smaller, right? So what that means is that we need to alter our scale. But before we alter the scale, let's fit to paper. Now you see that we have 0.2 on that particular A3. So what that means is that for us to use A3 to plot, that's this A3 paper size, to plot our extent, we need to change the scale. So from this 0.26, let's say we don't want to use 0.26, it definitely means that for a standard survey job, we don't really need A3 for that particular plot of land, right? Good, or maybe for this particular survey job. So it means that if you use A3, you cannot use a standard survey scale, because the nearest whole number or the nearest scale value we are going to have here is 0.3. and we don't have any scale as 1:300. So if you still change this thing to 0.5 and then you decide to apply to layout and then you preview, you will still see that you have more space than the area that your interest is. So what this simply means is that your scale, emphasis still is on that, is actually dependent on the paper size you are going to use, and then the paper size is also dependent on what the scale you are going to use. That's why we say you cannot pick one, therefore scale cannot be chosen arbitrarily, right? Good. And then the scale you use depends on the paper size, because the scale determines how much of the real world area can fit on a sheet of fixed physical dimensions. So today's tutorial is to show you that you can actually have a plot, however the paper size will determine the scale, or the scale will determine the paper size you are going to use, and overall you need legibility for you to be able to visualize whatever you have plotted. So you should have a blend of a balance, rather you should have a balance of the paper size and the scale, so that you can have a better legibility of whatever you have plotted. So let's say we are on A4 and then we decided to use the 0.5. Let us now export. Okay, let's apply that to the layout and then let's preview. That's the extent. Now let us plot. Okay, so we are on our folder of choice and then we've called it plot. Good. So we have opened the plot that we just exported. You can now see that on an A4 paper we just have this amount of extent left, compared to when we used A3 that we add some more redundant area. So the essence of today's tutorial, as we have said earlier, is to show you the relationship between your paper size and the scale that you have used. So we believe that we have elaborately explained those two concepts to you, and then we'll see you on another tutorial. Until then, keep staying safe and have a fantastic time. Bye.